start the game.
All right, there we go.
Sorry about that.
All good?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so officially, welcome this time to River City 93. I'm your host, as always, Elliot Barr. Joining me are Matt and Kate. We're doing our first true ever live show, thanks to Banana. He is an amazing person. We love him as always. And joining us is the real guest of the show, Mr. Mika. How are you doing, sir?
Doing
I'm not going
great.
to try to last name because I'm probably going to mess it up.
No, you're great. Yeah, doing well. Great day today.
So, all right. So, for those who don't know, we are actually, but go to your role again for this particular scene for the U20 kicker scene.
Yeah, so within our bigger organization, I'm the head assistant for the first team, but also the director of player development and methodology. And then for Richmond United, I'm the technical director. And really bridging those two roles is what we're here to watch today, the U20s.
Good. So, all right. So, like, we got a couple of questions, actually, and I'm going to start off first. But the main first question is, like, what were the primary goals when you guys developed this U20 team, and how have you guys achieved them thus far?
Yeah, really. I mean, there's two important components to that. Number one, just to implement a new level of competition is very, very important. So we wanted to be successful in, quote unquote, rolling it out and implementing it to the daily environment for the players. We're in relatively regular contact with the league. We're talking about where all of this is headed. And we would like to see this both on the men's and the women's side to go more towards where the clubs that have the same pathway, the youth to pro pathway, competing against each other. And that's why when we first talked about joining this league, we said that we want to be competing against NCFC. There's another conference in the Mid-Atlantic, but it's not with pro clubs. And we said from the very beginning, we want to be tested in the bigger markets as well. So number one, just to implement the new level. But number two, by doing so, start really evaluating what the true level of potential enrichment is, and then see what it means to the potential future roster build for the first team as well. Awesome. You have to add the intermediate piece where you have pro players playing and some of the more potential young players playing to see how close to the pro level those younger players are.
Awesome.
Yeah. So when you're evaluating, just like you were talking about, how do you balance especially when working with younger players, the individual development versus the actual results on the field? Because you hear from a lot of people, very different mindsets. Some people all about the development. Some people want more results. And where do the kickers organization fall kind of on that spectrum?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it is important to recognize the important duality and the connection between development and winning or competing as a team. What we're developing players for is to win. I mean, it's the only reason why we wear different jerseys every day, right? So those who say, "Oh, we're about development only," I'm not saying they're dishonest. I just think that it's maybe not fully articulated. What are you developing for? For us, the balance comes from the regularity of what we do and the quality of our staff. And even before we completed the pathway structure, if you look at players that we signed, where we signed them from, and how we invested into their development, I think Jonathan Bolaños is a very good example, but so is Neil Vigneault.
Very good example.
But Jono is a very good example because he came from High Point and gradually got better and better and better. But Neil Vigneault is in a similar trajectory. If you look at Neil, when he came to us from Tormenta, he was injured. He wasn't that productive. And he knew coming in, he said, I want to become more productive. So for all of the pro players too, we look at individual development plans. So we have a structure that works within the pro team already. And then we are implementing it to the academy players as well, all the way down to the U13s.
Oh, wow.
Obviously a different extent, but nevertheless, as the season starts, it starts parallel with here's your IDP, and here's the team principles, game model. This is what we aspire to do. But our goal is to develop players that, regardless of who's the head coach or the head coach's U20s, first team or whatever, the players can play in that style of play. So we're not developing the players just to suit the style of play of Darren Sawatsky or Connor Capoletti or Mika Alvara. We're truly trying to develop well-rounded players who, you know, if a college that is playing a completely different style from us is looking for young talent, that they can still come to our games and say, well, he can play for us.
Okay.
And then positionally, it should show, right? So when you look at James Snedden, for example, great example, he can, in possession, he can play short, he can play long. You know, he's not John Oblak, who can reach, you know, the penalty area on the other end, but his range is long enough that if James were to play for a coach who just wants to be more deep in counterattack, he can also play there. But we also really value, as you will see today, and you already saw against Spokane, he can also really play under pressure shortly. Fully answer your question, Matt, or no?
More than fully.
More than fully.
I just want to make sure, because everybody knows I love talking. This is passion for me. Want to make sure that I respect your time. So, yeah.
And likewise, that's why I want to move along.
There you go.
Look, we could do this show. This could be like a 3-hour show.
All right.
So like, all right, the next thing I gotta ask you is like, you kind of already hit it already, but like, how do you guys go about scouting and recruiting players for this level?
I go back to the question Banana actually asked in the season ticket holder meeting. You know, just because if you think about it, is there interest? Is there attraction from outside of Richmond? That's part of roster building. We already have players from not just out of market, but, you know, out of region, you know, from the Midwest, from the West, reaching out and saying, hey, could I try out for you guys? So that's part of the roster build, is to look at, like, okay, are there areas where our development, for example, hasn't been good enough? Like, are there positional areas where, you know, because some clubs are really good at developing, say, wingers and fullbacks, right? Our goal is, and I say this to the academy coaches all the time, is to develop high-level center midfielders. Because if we as a club, if we as an organization develop high-level midfielders, then we are also going to develop all the other positions. But if the focus is not with the midfielders, it so often tends to be in the higher line or in the deeper line, and then the midfielders don't become the well-rounded players. But if you prioritize slightly the center midfielders, think about how it affects the fullbacks. Think about how it affects how the target 9, for example, has to play if the ball can come from the goalkeeper or from a center midfielder. Yeah. So when it comes to roster building, those are some of the things we talk about and consider in terms of, okay, if we have too many of one position, then does it affect the formation we're going to play, or does it affect how we build a roster? Yeah. Both should always be within Connor's range in terms of deciding. If he wants to go with a 4-6 formation that Pep did with Barcelona at times, and he tells me this is because of this, it's his prerogative. So the roster building is very fluid. From the game that we played against NCFC away and won 3-1 a couple of weeks ago, there's, I think, 3 or 4 changes to this game. And it's based on how the players have been performing in the daily environment in training and in the games for Richmond United, including when we played against DC United a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, but there's priority criteria that we look at. Doesn't matter what position that the player is.
Oh, so that's a really depth answer. I love that.
I have sort of a 2-pronged question.
Yeah.
First, this is the first year of an academy at this sort of level of formality. So I'm wondering, what have been most exciting key moments from this season, and also what have there been any lessons learned, any adjustments going into year 2?
Great questions, Kate. People only say that when they don't know the answer, right? Why would I evaluate your questions? Just answer it, right? Well, absolutely. In terms of what I'm excited about is the fact that we went into the first competition, the USL Academy Cup, and our average age was 17. And we got to the final And then you can get into a soccer philosophical question or conversation of we should have won. Well, we didn't. So they did. And Indy 11 is a perpetual success story in player development and competing in the academy space. So all credit to them. They were better at what they do than we were at what we do. But going in there, being able to send James Sneddon, Landon Johnson, Gabe Cox, going in there and playing with Richmond United U19, U17, and U16 players, and to have that level of success early on, including beating Charlotte Independence, very rewarding because it is about winning. Pro clubs, it has to be about winning. If it's not about winning, you're not going to have a long career, right? So implementing something and implementing it with the expectation, we're not here just to be here. We're here to compete, to win from get-go. It's also something that Richmond Kickers are known for. Yeah. We're the most historic club in the country, and we have a history, we have a legacy of winning that we all need to try to maintain and continue and elevate. So it's very rewarding for me from our first conversations a year and a half ago about possibly doing this. And obviously before you do it, you don't know how it's going to go. Yeah. And with the challenges that we have we don't have our own training ground. We're nomads in our own in our own town, right? Yeah. And then so we have academy staff that are coaching in 3 different locations. Just that variable when you don't have your artifacts, when you don't have your trophy, when you don't have the pictures of your pros that you've helped develop, reminding you every day, we're up against a lot more than NCFC, for example. If you go to WRAL, where they train every day, and what they have over there, it's ridiculous in a way when you compare it to what we have or what we don't have. But on the other hand, it's exactly what they should have. And the director of soccer at NCFC is actually a former teammate of mine. So he and I have a very good, friendly, competitive relationship. And we talk about each other's environments a lot. He was super happy that we had the success. So that's definitely, for me, the number one thing. If you think about it, we've had games where we had a 15-year-old play, 2 of them actually, against a 25-year-old, right? And to be in the final game of the regular season, no matter what happens tonight, it has been a success. But we want it to be a success in the only way that people remember it is by winning tonight. But again, we have 15-year-olds in the roster today with Nick Simmons and Griffin Garnett. So those are the 3 big things. Number one, implementing it despite the variables that are in the way for us to do it well out of the gate. But getting to the final in the Academy Cup, being in the top of the conference right now, and then actually having probably the youngest average age of most of USL Academy, you have to see them as successes. In terms of what we know that we can improve for next year, I think there's things that are immediately available to us, and then there's other things that, if we had our wish, we would already improve in. For example, it'd be nice to have a home. But that's not within our control. We have great plans. I'm excited for everything that's happening with City Stadium. We're going to get there, but we'd like to be there already. But in terms of for next year, our goal is to continue to implement more of the younger players. This year, we were U19 heavy. I think next year you're going to see you're even going to see more U16 players. I think we can improve on that because we've seen this year that by trusting them, by giving them the responsibility, they've risen to the occasion, which goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Matt. There are always coaches, I would say more coaches, who just, for whatever reason, they don't trust the young players. It's like, we're gonna give him 10 minutes. Like, well, how about if you give him 30? What if he does rise to the occasion? Isn't it good for everybody? And I mean, I think globally you're starting to see that more, both in the men's and the women's game. And then so that's the last piece I'm going to add. We need to keep the women in the conversation as well. That's a goal for me in my role. That you guys saw what we did with the Ivy. There are younger Richmond United players already also getting the experience, but not just to. We don't want to give the experience just to give the experience. That's not good for anybody, including the players' development. If you haven't earned it, then you shouldn't get it. But to be aware of what is happening and how players are developing, we can get to a point where we're still competing for the title, but with an even younger player pool, which then pushes everything up. And then we can continue to say, no, you're good. You know, we love what you've done in Dallas or LA, but we prioritize the players from Richmond. We don't need, at least not many players from outside.
I want to ask you this question: how do you guys go about? Because for some of these players, like the end of the road stops here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you go about having those conversations with the players? Be like, hey, like it just didn't work out.
We don't. It's
Okay.
it's really not. It's. I mean, you look at Jamie Vardy. You know, like think of how many people told him, like, yeah, you're just not good enough, right? Definitely not our job to say no. Actually, if we've done our job well, we're going to say, well, right now your path is going to go there instead of here, right? But I mean, look at Gabe Cox. I mean, if you watch the way he's playing at Furman, like he's a
Like 2
leader.
goals already?
Yeah, and he's playing every game, and he's a leader. And you can look at, like, he came back from Columbus Crew, used that experience, continued to get better, kept his head down and did the work, was learning while he was here, wasn't quite ready for the pro permanent contract, right? He goes to Furman, but if he keeps playing the way he's playing in Furman, I don't know if he's going to finish Furman. He may finish Furman, but in terms of college soccer.
Yeah.
And that may be the path that some of the players take, but it doesn't mean that it's a lesser path. He's still very much part of us. Noah Wright, another example, you know, who knows what's going to happen with his career. Toby Ivey, you know, at Davidson College, like they're still very much part of us, and it doesn't mean that they're not going to be part of the Richmond Kickers. It's just that their path is not straightforward. It might be a parallel path in a different environment, which really leads to the importance of coaching staff. I don't want to end today before the game, before we talk about the importance of coaching staff. On the one hand, for the first time, I would say ever, but you're better knowledgeable about that than I am. But if you look at the 3 oldest age groups and the first team staff, we have Darren, Connor, Evan, and Reedy Doughty, and myself. We've all coached in the academy space. We've all coached in different levels of college. We've all coached men and women in college and pro and men's pro. I don't know if it's ever happened before. And then so
I don't think we've had 5 coaches on the first team staff before anyway.
Right. But then so when you start like, okay, well, why does that matter? It matters because when you have coaches who've been in different environments doing what we're trying to do in Richmond, right? Everybody brings their influences and experiences. There's voices that are contributing to the conversation from different angles that couldn't be considered without them. So that helps with player development when they're here, but it also helps with, okay, your connections to these college coaches. If we have players who are maybe not ready for the pro game right now, but are going to go to college, then it's like, well, we know that if you go to that school, he's going to help you continue to pursue your dream, as opposed to just going to school X because it's a big name, but maybe the development doesn't happen there. That's why it's so important in this environment for the coaches to be what they are, but also for the different possible paths that some of the players may take.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, talk about tonight's game anyway. We know about Nick Simmons.
You know about him?
I mean,
Oh,
look,
you know about him.
as a Jamaican, you know, I have prime bets on him making the 2026 World Cup. But I mean, we know about them. But who are some of the guys that are coming up that fans should be looking forward to seeing tonight
or maybe the 2025, first team season.
Yeah.
Since clearly there's been some good inroads for the 24 season.
Right.
Would you be interested in anybody who scored over 50 goals in a season?
Oh yeah.
I'm not really into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know you guys.
I'm about hardworking center back.
We have both.
Oh,
That's
perfect.
the exciting piece. We have players who are in, and going back to what we talked about earlier, in 3 different lines. And obviously, you can't overlook James Snedden, right?
Yeah.
You got to look at James, and he's the opportunity that we've had to have James in our first team environment and playing in the U20s. Without the U20s, I don't know if James would have had the opportunity to actually play the pro game that he did against Spokane. But by seeing him being the leader on this level, has made it easier to evaluate how ready is he. Obviously, he also, played in some of our friendlies and preseason games. But so James, obviously, one. Nick Sarantakos, number 9. He did score over 50 goals in the ECNL last season. He was in the ECNL Conference Cup. He's a very, very good 9. So keep an eye on Nick. You also have Andrew Richmond, who's an 8.
What a name.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just thinking about the possible NIL opportunities for him.
yeah.
There's something there.
Someone do a remake of We're Richmond, right?
Right. There you go.
But he's an 8. You will see him go box to box. He's got a huge engine. He's got a wicked left foot. In the center back position, next to Griffin, you're going to see a 16-year-old Axel Aldana Gallegos, phenomenal young man. Very, very good and composed. So off the top of my head, I would mention those 3. But I do think that we have some exciting players, both for potential 25 and beyond. So.
Also, I forgot to mention, but as a parent, you went through this process of having your kid go there because your daughter went through it with the Ivy.
Yeah.
So, as a parent, how was it seeing your daughter kind of progress through it on that side?
I mean, obviously, Kate and I had a great conversation at one of the games in Charlottesville. It's everything that you could ask for, right? Yeah. And everything that you read about. I mean, I was fortunate enough to grow up in an environment where what we are doing is the norm. Seeing how few clubs actually do this in America, I think it just intensifies the emotion as a parent that, when that opportunity is presented. For me, obviously, it was even more gratifying that it happened over here. It's Richmond, and Richmond's, we've lived here for 10 years now. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, look, man, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time. I think our time. I
always appreciate you guys.
Up with you, man. Look, like I said, we could probably have your show and just have a 3-hour full talk about it.
Yeah, and maybe 4 of us and someone else would actually enjoy watching that. I don't know.
We'll let you get on down there with the kids, man, and we wish you the best of luck tonight.
Appreciate that. We'll see you after the game.
Yes.
Connor, let me know. Happy to bring any of the players.
Thank you, Mika.
And Connor, obviously, as well.
Right,
okay.
Thank you so much,
Great.
Coach.
Yep. See you guys.